The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban street. A young girl, no older than 16, stood by the side of a battered car, sweat trickling down her forehead. Her clothes were worn, and her hands were rough from years of hard work she had learned to survive. The car had broken down right in front of the luxurious mansion where the rich lived in their bubble of comfort and luxury, a life she had never known. As she knelt down to fix the engine, her heart pounded, not from the physical exertion but from the desperation that clung to her every movement. She had to get this car running. The money she'd earned that week was barely enough to cover the rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her ailing mother. She had no choice but to take on this small repair job, hoping to scrape together enough to survive another day. Just as she twisted the final bolt into place, a sleek black sports car pulled up beside her, the engine's hum purring like a beast of luxury. The driver, a well-dressed man in his 40s, stepped out with the air of someone who had never known a day of struggle in his life. His perfectly tailored suit and polished shoes stood in stark contrast to the roughness of the girl working on the old car. He stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Hey!" the man called, his voice steady but with an edge of impatience. "Are you fixing that?" His gaze flicked over to the dilapidated vehicle and then back to the girl, his eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't look like someone who could fix anything, let alone a car as complicated as this one. The girl stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her worn jeans. She didn't answer right away, just nodded. Her mind was still racing, trying to figure out how to keep her head above water in a world that never stopped moving for her. She wasn't used to people staring at her like this, especially people with money. The man leaned against his car, arms crossed. "You sure you know what you're doing?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. It was obvious he didn't believe she could fix something so valuable, but she didn't let the doubt show on her face. She had fixed cars before. She'd been fixing things since she was small, just to survive. Her mother's condition had forced her to grow up quickly. "Yeah," she replied simply, her voice soft, but firm. "It's good to go now," the man raised an eyebrow. "I'm not so sure." He eyed her for a moment before shaking his head, seemingly amused. "All right, you know what? If you can start it up and drive it out of here, I'll give you $100. No questions asked." She had to stifle the urge to laugh, the offer sounding ridiculous. She wasn't in it for money. She was in it for survival. But she wasn't going to argue with someone who didn't understand her struggle. She slid into the car, turned the ignition, and within moments the engine roared to life, purring like a lion. She hadn't just fixed it. She'd made it hum like it had never been broken. The man's eyes widened. He wasn't expecting that. He took a step back, almost stumbling. "Well, I'll be damned." He stepped closer, clearly impressed now. He didn't know what had just happened, but he could see that the girl was no ordinary teenager. "Looks like you know what you're doing after all," he said, still shaking his head in disbelief. Then, as if something caught his attention, he looked at her wrist. His eyes immediately locked on the delicate silver watch that glimmered in the fading light. It wasn't an expensive watch. In fact, it wasn't anything remarkable, but there was something about it, something that made the man freeze. His face went pale, and his eyes widened in recognition. He moved forward, his gaze intense. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice suddenly tight with emotion. The girl, noticing the shift in his demeanor, looked at the watch on her wrist, a gift from her late father. It had always been a symbol of love, something to remind her that even though he was gone, he was still with her in spirit. She hesitated before replying. "It was my father's. He passed away last year." The man's face drained of color. His hand shook as he reached forward, as if the watch itself was something sacred. He took a step back, his mind racing, struggling to comprehend what he had just heard. His voice, now barely above a whisper, trembled as he asked, "What did you say? Your father passed away?" The girl nodded, her face softening, as if the memory of her father was both painful and precious. But what she didn't know, what neither of them could have known in that moment, was that her father and this man had crossed paths in a way neither could ever have imagined. The air between them was thick with unspoken truths, and the tension hung heavy, waiting for the pieces of their lives to fall into place. In that moment, both of their worlds were on the verge of colliding in a way neither could have predicted. The girl stood there, her hands still trembling from the engine work, as if the weight of the world was pressing on her shoulders. Her worn-out sneakers were caked with dirt, a stark contrast to the pristine condition of the rich man's car. Her clothes, faded and patched, were a reflection of the struggle she'd faced every day to survive. There was nothing glamorous about her life, nothing to suggest that beneath her tired exterior there was a spirit that was unbreakable. As the man continued to stare at her, she could feel the judgment in his eyes. It wasn't intentional, but it was there, lingering in the space between them. People like him didn't understand people like her. They didn't understand the exhaustion, the hunger, the fear that came with every breath she took. She didn't want to be seen as weak, but in that moment she felt incredibly small. It was as though her entire existence had been reduced to nothing more than her dirty clothes and her seemingly fragile appearance. The man, though, couldn't see past that. He saw a girl who didn't belong in a world like his, and he wasn't sure if he was pitying her or fascinated by her. He was used to seeing people in designer clothes, people who walked around with their heads held high, people who had never known what it meant to truly struggle. And yet, here she was, this girl, this innocent stranger who had just fixed a car he thought was beyond repair. There was a quiet dignity in the way she worked, an innocence in her determination. Every move she made was with purpose, even as her face betrayed the exhaustion she couldn't hide. Her eyes, though weary, sparkled with something he hadn't seen in a long time, a glimmer of hope, despite everything she had gone through. Her story wasn't one of luxury or ease, but of survival. She hadn't asked for pity, nor did she want it. She simply lived. Day by day, she fought to survive. And when the man looked at her, he didn't see that strength. Not yet. He saw a girl who, by all rights, should have been just another face in the crowd. Someone who didn't matter in the grand scheme of the world. But as the seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, something began to change in him. The quiet strength in her eyes, the way she never looked defeated. No matter how many obstacles life had thrown her way, struck a chord deep within him. There was a purity in her, an innocence that he had long forgotten existed. The man's judgment began to waver, replaced by a mixture of respect and awe. How had she fixed that car, when the people in his world couldn't even do something so simple without hiring an expert? And how had she kept going, despite the odds stacked against her, despite the invisible wounds that no one could see? She wasn't just a girl with rough hands and a patched-up shirt. She was someone who carried her pain with grace. Someone who could face the world's cruelty and still find a way to keep going. And that, to him, was the most powerful thing he had ever seen. In that moment, as he stared at her wrist, his thoughts shifted. It wasn't just about the car or the watch anymore. It was about her, the way she embodied a kind of strength he didn't fully understand. A strength that came from years of fighting a battle he could never truly comprehend. She wasn't looking for anyone's approval. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was worthy. She was already worthy, simply by existing. The man found himself feeling something unexpected: admiration. It wasn't just for her ability to fix a car or for the fact that he had just earned his respect in an instant. It was for the quiet resilience she exuded, the innocence that somehow remained intact despite everything life had thrown at her. And as he looked at the watch on her wrist, something clicked in his mind. It wasn't just a watch. It was a symbol of love, loss, and survival. A reminder that beneath the surface, there was a story worth listening to, a story that deserved to be acknowledged. For the first time in his life, he realized that true strength wasn't measured by wealth, status, or appearance. It was measured by the ability to endure, to rise above the challenges life threw at you, and to keep going no matter what. And this girl, this innocent, struggling girl, was the living embodiment of that strength. The more he watched her, the more the man felt something stir deep inside him. He had spent years building a life that revolved around wealth, success, and appearances, believing that these were the mark. For the first time in years, he started to question everything he had taken for granted. He had always thought that people who struggled simply lacked the opportunities he had. He'd convinced himself that success was the result of talent and hard work alone, that people were simply born into their circumstances. But here was this girl, fixing a car in the hot sun, with no recognition, no expectation of reward. She was strong, determined, and utterly self-sufficient. Everything he had strived to be, but in a way he never thought possible. As he looked at her, a strange realization began to dawn on him. She wasn't a victim of her circumstances, as he had assumed. No. She was someone who had learned to thrive in the face of adversity. She didn't see herself as broken, as someone who needed to be saved. Instead, she carried her own burdens with grace and quiet dignity. The watch on her wrist, something so simple yet so significant, represented not just the passing of time, but the weight of everything she had endured. The man had been blind. He had been blind to the strength in people like her, people who didn't have the luxuries of wealth or privilege. He had dismissed them as lesser, as somehow beneath him, when in fact they had lived lives of unimaginable resilience. The girl was living proof that true strength wasn't about status or money. It was about character, perseverance, and the courage to keep going when the world seemed stacked against you. He thought back to the way he had treated others in the past, the way he had dismissed people based on their appearance, their background, their social standing. He'd always assumed that his success entitled him to judge others, to look down upon them as if their struggles were of their own making. But now, standing there, feeling the weight of his newfound awareness, he couldn't help but feel ashamed. For the first time, he saw how flawed his thinking had been. His wealth had given him access to opportunities, to resources, to a life of ease and comfort. But in doing so, it had blinded him to the true value of people. He had been too focused on his own achievements to recognize the quiet heroism in those who fought every day simply to survive. And as the realization hit him, he understood something else. Something even more profound. This girl, in all her simplicity and innocence, had taught him more about life in the few moments they'd spent together than anyone ever had. It wasn't about fixing a car or the watch on her wrist. It was about the quiet dignity with which she moved through the world. It was about how she faced every challenge with courage, even when no one was watching. It was about how she had never asked for pity, never expected to be rescued. She had simply lived. The man felt a wave of humility wash over him. His life, which had been filled with material success, now seemed empty in comparison to hers. He had spent so many years chasing the wrong things, money, status, recognition, and in doing so, he had missed out on what truly mattered. The girl, standing in front of him with nothing but the strength of her spirit, had something he had never fully understood, a sense of purpose, an unwavering belief in her own worth, and the quiet resilience to rise above whatever life threw at her. And, in that moment, he knew that his life was about to change. He couldn't continue on the same path, chasing after things that no longer held any meaning. The girl had shown him the value of character over wealth, the power of self-reliance over entitlement, and the beauty of humility in the face of hardship. His moral awakening was not just about understanding the girl's struggle, it was about understanding his own. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, convincing himself that he was superior to others because of his achievements. But now, those walls were crumbling. The girl had reminded him that true success wasn't about what you had, but who you were. As he stood there looking at her, he realized that the watch on her wrist was a symbol of more than just her past. It was a symbol of everything he still had to learn. It was a reminder that life wasn't about what you accumulated, but about how you lived, how you treated others, and how you found meaning in the struggles you faced. And in that moment, he made a silent vow to change. He wouldn't just be a man who measured success by his bank account anymore. He would be someone who saw the strength in others, who recognized the dignity in those who had to fight for every little bit of progress. He would be someone who valued character over wealth, compassion over status, and kindness over power. The moral awakening he had experienced was nothing short of transformative. It had shaken him to his core, challenging everything he thought he knew about life. But it was also liberating, because it had shown him that true wealth wasn't found in material possessions, but in the depth of one's character and the ability to empathize with others. And so, as the girl finished working on his car, he looked at her differently. He didn't see just a poor, struggling girl anymore. He saw a person of incredible strength, resilience, and grace. And for the first time in his life, he saw the true meaning of success. The tension between them hung in the air, thick and charged with emotion. The young girl, having finished her work on his car, wiped the sweat from her brow, unaware of the man's growing internal struggle. She stood there, simple and grounded, her hands still slightly trembling from the effort, but her face a picture of quiet determination. As the man watched her, something deep inside him stirred. He had spent his whole life thinking he knew what hard work was. He had built his empire from the ground up, pouring his heart and soul into every deal, every business decision. But this girl, with nothing but her skill and a determination born out of necessity, had a strength he had never known. She wasn't looking for recognition or praise. She didn't expect anyone to pat her on the back. Her actions spoke, louder than any words could. She was simply doing what had to be done, without fanfare or hope of reward. He had watched her, taken in the way her hands had worked tirelessly to repair something broken, her brow furrowed in concentration, her eyes steady and focused. It was as if, in those moments, she had become the embodiment of something much greater than herself. Her struggles, her circumstances, her battle to survive, they all seemed to disappear when she worked, when she focused on solving the task in front of her. It was as though the world around her didn't matter. She had this unwavering determination to fix what was broken. But it wasn't just the car she was fixing, it was him. There was something about her presence, something about the quiet strength she radiated that was forcing him to confront everything he had buried deep inside. His life had been filled with empty pursuits, always striving for more money, more power, more influence. But this girl, with her broken shoes, worn hands, and quiet resilience, was reminding him of the simple beauty of just doing what was right. As she stood up after finishing the car, she caught his eye, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as though time had stopped. She wasn't aware of the impact she had on him. She was simply trying to make a living, trying to survive, trying to fix the things that broke in her world. But for him, this moment was profound. His heart began to race as the realization hit him like a wave. This was real strength. Not the kind that came from business deals or million-dollar transactions, but the kind that came from within. The kind that emerged in the face of adversity, in the quiet acts of survival, in the moments when life wasn't easy, but you kept going anyway. He had thought for so long that success meant accumulating wealth and status, that the world was about who you knew and what you had. But now, watching her, he saw how much he had been missing. The girl's simple act of fixing a broken car had shattered his perception of what success really was. She was the living embodiment of resilience, of strength, of someone who had learned to thrive despite the odds. He had never seen this kind of power in anyone before. She didn't need to boast, didn't need to show off. Her quiet determination was louder than any wealth or status he had ever accumulated. And then, without a word, she reached for her tools and started packing up. The moment felt too fleeting. He wanted to say something, to express the gratitude and awe he felt, but words seemed insufficient. Instead, he reached for his wallet, his thoughts clouded by a mix of emotions. What could he give her? A tip? Money? But deep down, he knew that what he felt wasn't something that could be bought. "Hey," he called out, his voice shaking slightly. She turned, her expression neutral, her face still flushed from the heat of the day. He found himself lost for words, his usual confident demeanor faltering under the weight of the emotions churning inside him. I just wanted to say," he struggled, unsure how to say what he was feeling. "You're incredible." She blinked, surprised by the compliment, but her face remained calm. "Thanks. Just doing my job," she replied simply before turning to leave. But it wasn't just her words. It was the way she carried herself, the way she seemed so at peace with who she was, despite everything she had faced. It was a lesson he wasn't expecting, one that cut deeper than any business negotiation ever could. She had shown him the true meaning of strength, not in the way the world saw it, but in the quiet, humble way she lived her life. And as he stood there, watching her walk away, he realized that for the first time he was questioning his own choices. The life he had built, the empire he had created, felt small in comparison to the quiet dignity she carried with her. Her resilience, her refusal to let life break her, had become a mirror to his own emptiness. He had been living for all the wrong reasons. This wasn't just about fixing a car anymore. It was about fixing himself. And in that brief, fleeting moment, she had opened his eyes to something he had never truly understood: the power of resilience, the strength in humility, and the beauty of a life lived with purpose. Her departure didn't feel like an end. It felt like the beginning of something new for him. A journey that would take him beyond the limits of his wealth, into the depths of his own heart. The moment she fixed his flat tire, the millionaire noticed something in her, an undeniable strength. She moved with a quiet, focused determination, her every action revealing a resilience he couldn't ignore. As she finished, he saw the tension in her posture, the way she'd looked away from the passerby's lingering gaze. It was clear. The world had been harsh to her, and he couldn't just stand by. A protective instinct rose in him. She wasn't just fixing cars, she was surviving. He saw her vulnerability, the unspoken hurt in her eyes, and felt an overwhelming urge to shield her from the harshness of the world. But it wasn't just protection he wanted to offer, it was respect. She deserved to be seen for more than her struggles. Determined, he approached her. "You're incredible," he said, his voice soft but filled with sincerity. "You don't let the world break you. That's what makes you different." Her eyes flickered, surprised as if she wasn't used to hearing such words. The millionaire's gaze softened. "If you ever need anything, you don't have to do this alone," he added. She gave a faint, grateful smile, but he could see the weight she carried in silence. He made a silent promise to himself then. He would stand by her. As the young girl wiped her hands on her worn-out jeans, the millionaire took a step closer, studying her carefully. There was something about her, something beyond her ability to fix a broken car in minutes. Her resilience intrigued him, but it was the glint of the watch on her wrist that caught his attention. It was simple yet elegant, and for a moment, his thoughts stalled. The face of the watch wasn't just any brand, it was one he recognized. His heart skipped a beat. This was the same model he had given his late wife, the same one that had been passed down in his family for generations. It made no sense. This girl, working at a roadside garage, shouldn't have this watch. A million questions rushed to his mind, but before he could ask, the girl turned away, as if trying to avoid any further conversation. "Hey, wait!" he called out, his voice tense with curiosity. She froze for a second, but didn't turn back. His mind raced. Could she be connected to his family? To his wife's past? Or was it just a coincidence? The watch seemed too important to be worn casually, but as he stepped closer, her gaze met his for a brief, vulnerable moment. "I don't need your pity," she said quickly, her voice low but firm. "I wasn't offering pity," he replied, his words genuine but filled with uncertainty. "I'm just trying to understand." "Why the watch?" For a long moment she hesitated. Her shoulders stiffened, and the air between them grew charged with unspoken history. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a reminder, not of the past, but of everything I'm working towards. To remind myself that I'm more than my circumstances." The millionaire's heart ached as the weight of her words sank in. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting for something greater, and this watch, this small token, was her symbol of hope. The revelation hit him harder than expected, and suddenly, the girl wasn't just a mechanic at the side of the road. She was a woman with a deep, untold story of strength. In that moment, the millionaire made a decision. He wasn't just going to stand by, he was going to help her in any way he could. The inspiration in her spirit had ignited something within him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but he was ready to follow her, no matter what it took. The day had shifted from the tense, unspoken moments to a quiet understanding. The millionaire had returned to the roadside garage every day since, each time finding the young girl working tirelessly, fixing cars, and building something for herself in a world that often overlooked her. Despite the harsh reality of her life, she stood tall, unwavering in her determination. But something was changing in her eyes, a hint of hope, a glimmer of belief that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to her future than struggle. As the sun began to set one evening, casting long shadows across the dusty lot, he watched her for a moment. Her hands were no longer trembling when she worked. She'd started to smile more, a quiet, cautious smile, like someone who was beginning to trust again. He approached, a small envelope in his hand, his heart pounding with something he couldn't quite explain. "I've been thinking about you," he began, his voice steady but filled with unspoken emotion. "About how much you've been through, and how much you're capable of." She paused, looking up at him, her brow furrowed slightly as though she didn't quite understand. He continued, "You're not alone anymore. I know things haven't been easy, but there's always a way forward." With a deep breath, he handed her the envelope, a small, heartfelt gesture that held far more than a piece of paper. It was a check, one with enough zeros to change her life forever. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she couldn't speak. This is too much," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "No," he replied softly, shaking his head. "It's not about the money. It's about what you've earned. You've shown me something valuable, your determination, your strength, and you've inspired me more than you know." Her fingers brushed the envelope, but she still seemed hesitant. He could see the doubt, the uncertainty still clouding her heart. But this time, it was different. She wasn't running from it. She was facing it. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't need to say anything," he replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Just know that you deserve this. You deserve a future that's yours to shape, not one defined by the past. This is your chance to build something that's yours." For the first time, he saw a tear slip from her eye. But it wasn't one of sadness. It was a tear of release, of clarity, of hope that had been buried for so long, and now it was rising to the surface. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to believe she could thrive. With a quiet nod, she took the envelope from his hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "You've given me more than just this check. You've given me hope." He smiled, the weight of the past few days lifting off his shoulders. "You've always had it in you. You just needed to see it for yourself." As she stood there, the evening light casting a golden glow on her face, she finally looked at him with full recognition. The watch on her wrist glinted in the fading light, no longer a symbol of what she had lost, but of what she was about to gain. "You're right," she said softly, her voice stronger now. "I'm not alone. I have everything I need to make it." The millionaire's heart swelled with pride. The journey wasn't over, but in that moment, both of them knew that it was the beginning of something new, something filled with promise, possibility, and the certainty that no matter the obstacles, hope would always lead the way. And as they both walked away from the garage, side by side,